Welcome to The Jewish World, the show that discusses the week's most pressing issues facing the Jewish state, the Jewish people, and the global Jewish community. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has taken a stand against the international boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Over the weekend, speaking at a town hall meeting at Brock University in southwest Toronto, Trudeau blasted BDS as anti-Semitic, claiming it is contrary to the Canadian values and intimidates Jewish students. The comments came in response to one attendee at the town hall who demanded that the Canadian leader retract his previous condemnations of the BDS movement. The attendee argued that thousands of voters and academics like himself support BDS, and so Trudeau owes it to them to follow the will of his constituents. But Trudeau didn't give in. His response was that people need to understand that anti-Semitism has manifested not just as a targeting of individuals, but also as in the targeting of the Jewish Democratic State of Israel. He then went on to explain by quoting former Canadian Justice Minister Irwin Cotler's 3Ds: the demonization of Israel, the double standard around Israel, and a delegitimization of the State of Israel. And finally, Trudeau added that in Canada, we have a right to recognize that there are things that aren't acceptable, not because of foreign policy concerns, but because of Canadian values, and that it's not right to discriminate or to make someone feel unsafe on a college campus because of their religion. Yet unfortunately, the BDS movement is often linked to those kinds of incidents. Prime Minister Trudeau says that he will continue to condemn the BDS movement, but that Canada does support a two-state solution that should be negotiated directly by Israel and the Palestinians. The Eurovision International Song Competition is set to come to Israel in 2019, and already anti-Israel haters are doing everything they can to try to prevent this from happening. On Saturday, anti-Israel protesters burst onto the platform in France to interrupt a qualifying round for the Eurovision Song Competition as Israeli singer Netta Barzilai stood on stage. Barzilai, who won the 2018 Eurovision competition, made a special appearance during the semi-final of Destination Eurovision, the French TV show which selects the country's contestant for the singing contest. And while there, she performed her winning song, Toy. But after her performance, as the host called the contestants on stage, a small group of protesters jumped on stage to interrupt the show. The protesters then held up signs saying no to Eurovision 2019 in Israel, before they were quickly escorted away by security. And the BDS France movement took credit for the disturbance, calling to boycott the Eurovision competition because it is set to take place in Israel, calling it Destination Apartheid. But following the incident, France too, which aired the show, defended its decision to participate in the competition and said in a statement that music has no borders. Barzilai also responded to the event and said that 5 people who came to spread darkness and not speak about music and love won't bother me on a night like this. The 2019 Eurovision Song Competition will take place in Israel in May, and the annual event is set to receive widespread media attention while drawing tens of thousands of fans to the Jewish state. This has made it a prime target for anti-Israel protesters and pro-BDS activists, who are calling on countries and individuals to boycott the event, though so far with little success. A team from Israel sent to Budapest, Hungary, to scan the Danube River for the bodies of Holocaust survivors dumped there have come up empty-handed. A sonar scan of the bottom of the Danube River was completed this week as part of the search, but according to Israeli emergency service group Zaka officials and the local rabbi who initiated the search, no human remains have yet been found. This latest search comes 8 years after a shocking discovery in 2011 where human remains were found during construction work on a bridge over the Danube River. DNA tests then later revealed that the bones belonged to at least 9 Ashkenazi Jews from Europe back in 1944 to 1945. At the end of the Second World War, thousands of Jews were shot by the banks of the river by Hungarian Nazi collaborators. Volunteer divers and experts from Zaka operated the sonar scan from the banks of the river this past week in the hopes of finding more remains that could be properly laid to rest. Zaka chairman Yehuda Meshi Zahav explained that this is the final act of grace we can do for these holy victims who were killed in sanctification of the Lord's name. So although no remains were found in this initial scan, the team is not giving up, and they are already scheduled to come back next month to try again. We'll continue to follow this story as it develops. Hundreds of women's marches erupted all across the United States and abroad this weekend for the third year in a row, again to call attention to the systemic issues facing women. But while hundreds of thousands showed up for what is certainly an excellent cause, many thousands more, including top American officials, celebrities, and organizations, either retracted their support for the movement or marched in parallel demonstrations, all due to the persisting allegations of anti-Semitism plaguing the Women's March leadership. In fact, in November, one of the movement's core founders, Teresa Shook, called her colleagues Bob Bland and Tamika Malloy, Carmen Perez, and Linda Sarsour to step down for having steered the movement away from its true course. At the march, Mallory attempted to address claims of anti-Semitism and said to a crowd in Washington, D.C.,
"To all my sisters, I see you. To my Muslim sisters, I see you. To my Latina sisters, I see you. To my Asian sisters, I see you. To my disabled sisters, I see you. And to my Jewish sisters, do not let anyone tell you who I am. I see all of you. I see you and I hear your pain."
Yet, in the weeks leading up to the march, the leaders refused to unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism and distance themselves from Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan. Just last week, when co-chairs Tamika Mallory and Bob Bland appeared on the TV show The View, Mallory refused to condemn the racist and homophobic remarks of Farrakhan, instead saying that she doesn't share his language. The preacher has called Jewish people termites as recently as just a few months ago. And both Mallory and co-chair Carmen Perez have expressed their support publicly for him in the past. Then, in another interview with PBS, which aired on Sunday, Mallory again refused to answer a question regarding Israel's right to exist and said that the Palestinians were native to the land of Israel. And finally, racism monitor Canary Mission also just released their Women's March expose, in which details and anti-Semitic comments about all four leaders are documented and presented.
Only under this idea that we have to accept you as a Zionist and a feminist because you want to impose that on everybody else in the movement. I'm just letting you know that's just not how it works in the movement.
And I want to make the distinction that while anti-Semitism is something that impacts Jewish Americans, it's different than anti-Black racism or Islamophobia because it's not systemic.
You can see the full video on the Canary Mission homepage and social media. This leads us to our next topic. Israel and the issues surrounding Israel have traditionally received bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress. But a new wave of freshman Democratic congressmen is bringing this support into question. The first Palestinian-American congresswoman elected to office, Rashida Tlaib, has already vocally expressed her support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, as has freshman Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who, despite her anti-Israel stance, was appointed to the House Foreign Relations Committee. And we also have Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who has expressed her criticism of Israel in past remarks. This new wave of incoming Democrats begs the question, is this the new face of the Democratic Party in the United States with regards to Israel? And joining us to discuss is former chairman of Democrats Abroad Israel, Sheldon Shore. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So we've just had a segment on the Women's March and anti-Semitism plaguing the movement. And then here we have a Democratic Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib, as we said, the first American Palestinian to be elected to Congress, posing with Linda Sarsour of the Women's March, holding a map of the Middle East with a post-it of Palestine with an arrow to where Israel would be. And this past week, there she is with Abbas Hamideh, who heads a right of return advocacy group that has equated Zionism to Nazism. He attended her swearing-in reception in Detroit and tweeted a photo of the two of them together. This is, I think, troubling to say the least. And I have to ask, is this the face of the new Democratic Party?
And the simple answer to that is no, it's not the face of the new Democratic Party. This is clearly an aberration. These are a few new people who have a different view. They are part of a few hundred that came in, not all of whom support this idea. The Democratic Party itself, as a group, is clearly against this sort of thing. They've recently dissociated themselves from the Women's March precisely because of the anti-Semitic attitude of Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour. despite whatever they say. I think at the Women's March on Saturday came out and said things that were very nice to Israel because she realizes that she's losing a base. She's losing a lot of people, but that's just pure political. Clearly, they are anti-Israel, especially Mallory, who refused in an interview to acknowledge the right of Israel to exist, which is just shocking. And it's a shame that the women's movement has to, which has a good agenda, and an agenda which is very similar to much of the Democratic Party, that agenda has to be lost because of the silliness of this and the racism and bigotry of a few of its leaders. It's very sad. But I don't think that the few people that we're talking about necessarily do represent a new wave or a new direction. You'll have to wait another election to see whether or not there'll be more people that come in like this. But I think that the Democratic Party still is largely, except for these few, very supportive of the state of Israel, and I think we can take comfort from that.
Okay, but I mean, we also have Ilhan Omar, who was appointed to the House of Foreign Affairs Committee. You know, despite her anti-Israel stances, Nancy Pelosi even received backlash for this move, as the Democratic Party, rather than push these views to the back, has essentially put them at the forefront, sort of acknowledging this ideology.
Well, look, a congressman, first of all, we're talking about U.S. congressmen. These are people who are in charge of making U.S. laws. They represent the United States. They were put by their voters in to represent their districts and to represent the interests of their districts. And there's no reason why you shouldn't give them a chance to do exactly what their voters ask them to do, and to have the same opportunities for various committees as anybody else. Now, if they persist in doing things that are wrong, and then the answer would be in 2 years they can be voted out of office. Or if it turns out that their voice is accepted, maybe you'll have more people. I hope not that do this thing. But there's nothing wrong with having a political view, and to say that we should put more emphasis towards Palestinian rights. That's a perfectly legitimate thing. What is not legitimate is to deny equal rights for Jews to have their homeland and to the state of Israel to exist. That is anti-Semitism, that is bigotry, and that is not acceptable.
Now, how concerned are you about these developments as head of sort of, or former chairman of the Israel Democrats Abroad here in Israel?
I am upset. I am upset. I don't like that this happened, even though it's a few. From a few can grow more, but this is an issue that has to be dealt with head on. And this is in the political arena. This is exactly what you do in the political arena. You, at that point, meet with each other, talk, try to convince. They will try to convince me that I'm wrong. I'll try to convince them that they're wrong, and something will come out of it. And as long as it's kept on that level, it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. The problem with BDS, for example, is that it goes far beyond talk. It is talk with action, and talk with action can be irresponsible and can be damaging and can be injurious.
But that's what we are talking about here. I mean, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, they both vocally expressed their support for the BDS movement.
Right, and if that were to become law in the United States, I would be more than slightly upset. I'd be livid. But I don't think that will happen. And right now, it's interesting that the very first bill that was put into the new Congress was one, A, to support Israel and its and the financial commitment that Obama made for the next 10 years, and B, to make it harder for BDS to take hold in the United States. So I think that is a stronger indicative of the direction of the United States and the direction of the Democratic Party.
And are you at all concerned for the future? I mean, are we going to see Israel or the issue surrounding Israel becoming just a partisan issue, do you think? Is this a possibility?
Partisan? No, absolutely not. This is bipartisan support. This is the United States. The United States is against bigotry. The United States is for tolerance for others. And the United States and Israel are two of the strongest allies traditionally, and for the last 20, 30 years especially. We've had president after president supporting and understanding the need for Israel, and both as a strategic ally and also because of the values of the United States and the values of Israel are so similar. And they walk hand in hand. They both are democracies. Both are struggling democracies. Both are imperfect. The United States is an imperfect democracy. I don't have to tell you how the treatment of African Americans, over 100 years ago and continuing today has been bothersome, and part of the women's rights, the Women's March, is also to deal with the problems of minorities in that respect, and they have a voice because there are still problems. And and Israel is a struggling democracy, which, despite the fact that it's been attacked by countries after countries and attacked in the UN, and it is still nevertheless a beacon of light and a beacon of rights, and it's imperfect and needs improvement, but it wants to improve, and I think to that extent it should be applauded, and the world should recognize that. At some point the world's hypocrisy is going to have to stop.
Great. Well, Sheldon Shore, thank you very much for
Pleasure.
joining us. Thank you. So today we are celebrating Tu B'Shvat, the holiday of trees. And what springs to my mind when thinking about this holiday is tree planting in Israel. And so who better to talk to about this than Keren Kayemet L'Israel, the Jewish National Fund. So joining me with some happy holiday news about tree planting in Israel and other activities in Jewish communities around the world is Elisha Mizrahi of KKL-JNF. So, hi Elisha, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And Chag Sameach and a very happy Tu B'Shvat.
Happy Tu B'Shvat to you as well. So why don't you tell me a little bit about KKL-JNF activities in Israel? How are you celebrating Tu B'Shvat?
Well, adding another quite a bit of parts of land that is being planted in the last 10 days. And we are talking about 500,000 trees that were planted by kids, by elders, any site in the country you can imagine, south and up north to the Galilee. In most of the communities, people are gathering, coming out to our forest and helping us in planting new areas for recreation and, of course, for greening the country.
Now, can you give us some statistics maybe on how many trees, I'm curious to know, how many trees have been planted since the establishment of the State of Israel? Do you have any figures like that?
We are talking about more than 100 years. The first plantation took place in 1907. So we are talking about many years and many trees. And we've been achieving a huge achievement in a desert area. We were able to establish forest, and we are talking about almost more than 6% of the country was afforested. So we are talking about 240 million trees that were planted along the years.
And what can we expect for the coming year, not just for Tu B'Shvat, but looking forward? I mean, how many trees do you expect will be planted in Israel this year?
We are talking about 500,000 trees. And you can imagine not all of those huge amount of trees are being planted in forest. We supply trees from our nursery to most of the communities, and we are talking about high schools, kindergarten, municipalities that takes trees and plant them in their own landscaping. We are talking about army bases that are down in the desert area, in the Negev area, that can get trees from Kakal and plant it. We are talking about Arab villages that are coming and of course doing the same in their own communities. And actually this is one of the very nice things, that it's something that connect communities in between.
And speaking of communities, what about Jewish communities around the world? I mean, they're also coming to Israel planting trees. Can you tell us a little bit about their activities in Israel, planting trees?
First of all, there is a very famous and a very old custom of planting your own tree from a board. You can launch either on a website or donate to the local JNF Kakal branch in your country and plant a tree on the name of someone. We do it for new kids that are being born. We are doing for bar mitzvahs, celebrations, weddings, and of course, if someone is, passed away in your family, one of the things you will do is plant kind of a grove on his name. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the things that you can do in any corner.
Mm-hmm. Now, KKL-JNF is not just about planting trees. You do a lot of outreach and a lot of activities throughout the Jewish world and Jewish communities around the globe. Can you tell us a little bit about those activities and maybe give us some highlights of specific things you've done in Jewish communities?
Kakal was established mainly for developing the country of Israel, either for the Jewish people that came from Europe or from the North Africa communities, but not just for Jews. We are talking about locals as well. So what we are doing, we are actually getting most of the aid from Jewish communities around the globe and invest those resources in many projects that the country needs. And it will be a different kind of goals accordingly to the needs of the country in each era. Starting from purchasing the land for establishing new communities, new cities back then, we are talking about more than 18 years ago. And of course, invest in water resources that were needed because we are in a kind of droughts that are coming every now and then, and water was an issue. So Kakal invested in building 250 reservoirs, which is a quarter of our water needs yearly. So it's like creating a new resource for either for the farmers or for the landscaping in any use you might consider. We are talking about greening not just the mountains. We are talking about greening the communities themselves. So we will invest in parks, in city parks, in the municipalities. And in the last years, what we were thinking together with our partners abroad, that we need to invest more and more in the local communities.
Local communities here in Israel?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. In those places where the social, economical situation is, I might say, it's not bad, but it's not flowering. And we need to invest over there, so we will invest in education. And this is one of the things that we are doing in the last years, not just in high schools or in preschools. We are talking about youth that need the afternoon activities, and Kakal JNF is upgrading those activities in the communities with a lot of efforts and a lot of help from our friends all around the Jewish communities.
Great. Alicia, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and happy Tu B'Shvat.
Thank you as well.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's show. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and all of you, our viewers, for tuning in. And we'd love to hear from you, our viewers. If you have any stories, whether about anti-Semitism, BDS, or any positive events going on in your Jewish community, you can reach out to us on Facebook at Israel English News, on Twitter at ILTV News, and on our website at iltv.tv. I'm Lidar Gravelazi. Thanks for watching.